What's up, guys? Yesterday was either 3-4 or 4-3, depending on where you got those numbers. 'Cause I was wrong about the Miami Heat. They actually went up to plus 6.5 closer to game time. I don't know why that was the case. Hero did not play again. He was listed as being out, but I thought the line was kind of already accounting for that, but maybe it wasn't. So I was wrong about which way the line was going to move in that one, and that mattered. That was the difference between a slight win and a slight loss, although either one of those 3-4 or 4-3 are obviously way better than the 0-3 start last night. And the 0-3 start was just ridiculous. If you look at the statistics in those games, the one that was like the most legitimate loss was the Southern Utah one, because at least in that one, like the statistics are pretty close as far as they had the same number of field goal attempts, pretty much the same number of free throws. And then Abilene Christian did dominate Southern Utah on the boards. That Abilene Christian is the better rebounding of those two teams. So I was relying on Southern Utah being the better shooting team in that game, but that wound up not being the case. And if you look at that box score, you read that right. Abilene Christian, not a very good shooting team, somehow shot 70% from three-point range in the game. And that wound up basically being the difference in the game in that one. 70%, 7 for 10. That's an outlier. You don't see that, but the other games were more statistically anomalous than that one by far. Even the East Carolina one, which wound up being an absolute blowout in the wrong direction on the scoreboard. But look at that game. That game did not play like an 82-58 final whatsoever. Memphis shot 57% from the floor. They had 10 fewer field goal attempts than East Carolina. So East Carolina had 10 more field goal attempts. They had 6 more free throw attempts and 2 more free throw makes. They had 5 more rebounds. They had only 2 more turnovers. So you look at this game, it's like, how did East Carolina lose this game by almost 30 points? It makes absolutely no sense. And it's because Memphis shot 57% from the floor and East Carolina only shot 30%. 57-30. So Memphis almost doubled their field goal percentage. So even though East Carolina had 10 more attempts from the floor and had more possessions, and they won basically every statistical category almost, Memphis actually had more field goal makes. Absolutely ridiculous. That's insane. And then the other game, statistically, was really crazy as well, and probably should have gone my way with the Longwood game. Longwood was getting absolutely annihilated in that game, and they came all the way back. They were down probably more than 20 points, just getting absolutely blown out of the building. They came all the way back and tied the game in the final couple of minutes of the game. Probably should have wound up covering and still wound up missing by a half point. And in that game, you had Gardner Webb had 11 more free throw attempts and 7 more free throws. So that alone was something that did it there in the game. They had 10 more three-pointers made in the game as well. So those are just statistical anomalies as well. You don't usually see a team, even if they're the team at home and they're getting to the bucket more or whatever, you don't usually see them have that many more free throw attempts, but also the three-point shooting is just insane. Shooting 56% from three for Gardner Webb. 10 more three-pointers made. Longwood, not really their game. They play more on the inside, but Longwood had 14 more field goal attempts and still didn't win the game. They had 7 more field goal makes and still didn't even cover as the underdog. And they had 11 more rebounds, dominating the boards as well. And they had 4 fewer turnovers. And I think this was the game, if you look at it, Longwood, I think, outscored Gardner Webb in the paint like 46-14 or something like that. I'm not going to look it up again, but it was something absolutely insane where you usually want that team that's the team that just completely dominates in the paint, but it didn't even matter because Gardner Webb shot 56% from three and hit 14 threes and had the free throw discrepancy. So that one should have been a win as well. So last night, I feel like I'm a broken record and I keep saying it, but last night, I don't think my handicapping was that bad last night. It should have been a win rather than a loss. And then the other 2 college games, both were outright underdog winners with Bakersfield and Northern Arizona. That was nice. Northern Arizona went into double OT, and it got maybe a little bit sketchy, but they obviously were the right side in that game and did wind up doing. They won outright in the end. And then Miami was behind by quite a bit in the NBA, but they came back and they got within the larger number. They covered the 6.5 that it was closer to game time, did not cover the 5.5 or whatever, missed that by 1 point. So that's great, or by a half point. That could have been a cover as well. And the Washington Wizards would have been nice if they went outright and hit on the money line sprinkle there. That would have been a big money line sprinkle on the Wizards. That game actually wound up going up to 10.5 by game time, but not much of a difference between 10.5 and 9.5 really. But that game wound up going into overtime, and they of course covered. Moving to today, it's a small card. It's a Friday card. We're going to get old school with this Friday card. And then we're only going Ivy League, and we're going NBA. One play in each, skipping the NHL, skip it completely. Only 3 games tonight in the NHL. It was a bigger card last night. I didn't even want to get involved in it last night, although my Bruins won a game for once. Yeah, even though I think they were in a road trip return, they got the returning champs Vegas coming into Boston and actually beat them. So at least there's that. Today, what do we got? Men's college basketball. We're going to the Ivies. That's the old school way to play Friday. Not a huge card here. Friday is all these, it's just mostly crap conferences. You got the MEAC, or excuse me, not the MEAC, the MAAC, the MAAC getting a bunch of play tonight. I'm not going to get involved. And then the Atlantic Sun. Very bad conferences that I kind of just tend to avoid. A couple more interesting games. Dayton and Loyola Chicago is probably going to be a pretty interesting game in the A10 with 2 of the top teams in the A10 battling. Dayton probably looks like they're in line for an at-large bid into the tournament, even if they do not win the A10 tournament. They're down from a 2-point favorite to a 1-point favorite. I think that one's going to be interesting. Don't really have that much of a read on that one. And then a couple games in the Mountain West don't look very interesting at all. The game that I'm going to in the Ivy League is going to be to grab Harvard. We're grabbing Harvard, the local boys here, even though I'm not a fan of the academic institution whatsoever. This is actually going to be a big game, kind of for both teams, but maybe a little bit bigger for Harvard. We're going to play Harvard here, and they're actually getting 2.5 points, which I don't love the fact that they're getting points and they're the team with a way, way better record over Brown, because I think the recreational bettors might look at that and perceive some value there in Harvard as well, seeing that they're getting points and they have the better record and thinking that they're the better team, although they are the better team. The odds makers are telling you that they're the better team, with Brown only being a 2-point favorite at home, not getting full home court advantage. Ken Palm also has this at 2. I think there are 2.5s out there, and I can grab the 2.5 on this, but I think the spot is much better for Harvard here. Even though Harvard, Ken Palm does have them at 17th in luck, so that scares me a little bit too, because it's indicative that their record is better than it should be. But Brown's record is so bad. Although, like I said, that might lead the recreational bettors to want to grab Harvard here. But either way you look at it, any way you slice it, I think it's a bad spot for Brown, and I think Harvard is the better of the 2 teams here, as Ken Palm is telling you, although he only has them about 20 ranking spots higher, and he has this number, I believe, at 2 as well. And both of these teams kind of similar in the way that they play statistically. Harvard is the slightly better defense, actually, and they're getting points. So I do like that. Harvard is actually the slightly better defense and offense, so I like those. And Brown, the slightly slower team, but both of these teams not really playing a particularly fast pace. They play like similar paces, kind of mid to slow pace, so I don't think that's going to be a factor. They both kind of play at the same pace. The factors in this game that lead me to playing the Harvard side are the fact that Brown is coming off a massive win. They just went on a 3-game win streak all on the road and ran off a stretch of nice games, including the game that they lost prior to that. They played pretty competitively at Princeton, which is crazy. So Brown went on a nice run. They won at Penn and won at Columbia, but of course those are 2 of the teams that are below Brown in the conference. They were able to beat those 2 teams, even though those teams have better overall records. They're actually probably worse than Brown, but then their 3-game road trip turned into, culminated in Brown going into Cornell and beating Cornell, who had the best record in the Ivy at the time, even though I think Princeton is probably the best team in the Ivy. Cornell is obviously one of the top 3. You have the top 3 in the Ivy, Princeton, Cornell, and Yale, and then there's a big gap after that between those. That's a huge win for Brown, beating Cornell there, even though this is also going to be kind of a big game for standings purposes, which mean a little bit more when we come down the stretch run in the Ivy. So I'll talk about that in a second. But Brown's coming off a massive win, dude. That's an 11.5 point upset win as a huge underdog there. I don't know if Brown's going to have that much left in the tank after that, even though, yes, this is a big game for them as well. playing Harvard. They're coming off just such a monster win over Cornell, and they played Cornell tough the first game too, and only lost to them by 1. But that's, just such a gigantic upset. I just don't know what they're going to have left in the tank here. And they already won at Harvard earlier this year. So this is also going to be a road revenge type of situation for Harvard, where is it possible that Brown takes their foot off the gas a little bit here effort-wise? Maybe, even though, like I said, they're still battling for standings. And in the Ivy, it matters more because only the top 4 teams make the Ivy tournament. So the bottom 4 miss the tournament. So if you're trying to get into the Ivy tournament, I mean, that is a pretty big goal, even though I don't think either of these teams is going to win the Ivy tournament. I think one of the top 3 Ivy teams is going to come out of there with the win. But either Harvard or Brown basically look like they're going to be the 4th team in that tournament. And I think Harvard, even though it seems like it's always Harvard, Yale, Cornell, and Princeton, it seems to always be those 4 teams. I don't think Harvard wants to allow that to not be the case this year. So I think Harvard might have a little bit more motivation here because they did already lose to Brown on their own floor. I think they might be a little bit angry about that, whereas Brown, coming off such a monster win, their big win of the year, they might run out of gas a little bit here, run out of steam. And I don't know if they'll take their foot off the gas just a little bit, even though this is a big game, just because they know they already beat Harvard on the road. And maybe Brown's just feeling a little bit high on themselves off of such a monster win over Cornell, whereas Harvard not playing as well, but they played a couple of tough games recently, and they lost to Cornell twice and Princeton. If you look at Harvard's losses in the conference, one of them is to Brown, but all of their other losses are to Yale, Princeton, and Cornell. So they've played 5 games against Yale, Princeton, and Cornell so far and lost all 5. So they've lost all the games against the better teams in the conference, have done well against the teams that are below them in the conference, except for the fact that they lost to Brown. So Harvard is still the better team. I think they might be a little bit angry about that. They're getting points. They have the slightly better defense. I like this. They're coming off kind of a big game, I guess, because it was their home closer, but they're still going to be focused because the Ivy tournament is at stake here. So I think when it comes to a situation like that, I think the better team and the team with the better defense also is kind of the way that you want to look when it comes down to it as well in a big game like that, if you don't even consider the fact that Brown might also be in a huge letdown spot, and it is a little bit of a revenge spot. Harvard still being the slightly better team, I think also is going to factor in here. So I like Harvard for all those reasons. Getting the points there, have it. We'll do that, plus the 2.5 there. I don't know if I thought I was going to comment on one other thing, but maybe not. Harvard won in their last game, like I said, in their home finale, which is a big win, but they beat Penn and kind of barely got by them. So I think maybe they had one eye looking ahead to maybe these games, or maybe because they were coming off a kind of tough game against Princeton, I think maybe they kind of overlooked Penn, but they were also dominating that game against Penn. They had a double-digit lead in the middle of the game and then let the entire lead go away. Maybe Harvard got a little bit complacent and took their foot off the accelerator there, but they still were able to put the game away when it came down to it at the end. So I'll be on Harvard. And then over in the NBA, one play, although I'll mention one other game because one other lean that I have in the NBA that I just don't think I can get there with it, because I think both teams are kind of coming off big games, is the lean would be to the Portland Trailblazers again, but also it's like, do I really want to keep playing the Portland Trailblazers and just losing on them every single time? Probably not. But now that I lay off of them, this will be the time they actually cover and win the game, probably. Playing at the Memphis Grizzlies, who are also a struggling team. Of course, Grizzlies down from 3 to 2.5. 82% of the tickets on the Grizzlies somehow, but Trailblazers have 93% of the tickets. So looks like a big pros versus Joes situation with the public on the Grizzlies, the majority of the cash over on the other side on the Trailblazers, and the line moving down on the Grizzlies towards the Trailblazers. Grizzlies, like I said, they're coming off a big game, and they played the Minnesota Timberwolves in their last game really tough, and that was 2 nights ago. The Grizzlies actually had a lead for some of that game. They actually had a lead almost by double digits towards the end of the third quarter. They were still actually leading the game, and they were leading early in the game too. They had a big lead early, kind of playing a pretty good game against Memphis, sticking it to them, and then against Minnesota. Minnesota came back and were able to get back in the game, but the game was still real close with like 5 or 6 minutes left to play. The game was within 1 score, I think. Really good gameplay by Memphis. They out-rebounded Minnesota, played a really good game there. They just shot a very low percentage, as I guess Memphis kind of tends to do. Minnesota outshot them for sure. Neither team shot that well, really. Minnesota definitely shot better, 40% from three. Minnesota was able to come back and get out of there with the win. So that's a tough game for Memphis, man. Coming off a big miss there against Minnesota where they played real well and could have beaten Minnesota and almost did on the road. Now they're coming back home and they get the Portland Trailblazers coming into their house, although both these teams have bad records. So I think both these teams are going to want to try to get a win here, but they're also both in bad spots. Like I said, I think the Grizzlies are in the worst spot after that, and that would lend me to wanting to play on the Portland Trailblazers here, but the Trailblazers, they're coming off a tough game against the Miami Heat as well, where I was on that game, and the Trailblazers had the lead for a lot of that game, an even bigger lead than what the Grizzlies had. Blazers were dominating that game at various points, and they lost the entire lead, and it wound up losing the game. They wound up losing the game at the end. I guess Ayton sprained his hand in that game for the Blazers. I don't know if he's playing tonight, but I'm not getting involved in this game either. He is one of their better players, Ayton, out of the University of Arizona, I believe, and I believe he was on the Phoenix Suns for a little while as well, but he is one of the best players. I don't know if he's playing tonight, so I don't know if there's going to be an injured player theory aspect to this at all, but we'll see about that. But the Blazers are also coming off that almost win over the Heat where they played really well, and they just completely imploded and let that game get away from them. So both of these teams are coming off almost upset wins. So I don't like the spot because both teams are almost in a similar situation, but I think it's a little bit better for Portland because Portland's actually going out on the road to start a road trip. So that usually tends to be more of a focus spot where you get to refocus on basketball, get out on the road. You just lost a bunch of games at home. You put that aside and just go out on the road, try to refocus a little bit. So the lean would be to Portland. The game I'm actually going to be on, though, in the NBA, you got to be kidding me with this one. It feels like I think, what is this, the third straight time that I've played this team? The Toronto Raptors is going to be the only play I have in the NBA today. This is sitting at 2.5 with the Warriors as the road favorite. Warriors have 95% of the tickets, 99% of the cash right now. I don't know if there's much to take away from that, but we know the Warriors are going to be the public team. They're the team that has Steph Curry. I mean, they have a winning record now. They've been playing much better basketball for a while now. They're playing a lot better. Nobody in their right mind is going to want to take the Raptors here, as I keep saying, which means that's why I'm on the Raptors, because I'm a lunatic. I'm insane. I think this is a sandwich spot for the Warriors, man. The Warriors are in a real bad spot. They're in a back-to-back. They played last night, and they pretty much dominated the New York Knicks on the road at New York. The Knicks, pretty good team, but they've kind of been faltering recently. They have a good defense. They're not a very good scoring team, and they're just kind of fading a bit now, the Knicks, after they had a pretty good record for a while. They still have a winning record, though. It's still a good win for the Golden State Warriors there last night, and now they're playing a back-to-back. They're playing a third game in 4 nights, all in different cities. It's a fourth game in 6, all in different cities, and it's also a 5th game in 8 days and a 6th game in 9 days coming out of the All-Star break. There's been almost no let-up, and out of those games, 3 of them have been against pretty big teams, against the Lakers, Denver, and the Knicks, and they've had the other games kind of sandwiched in between those games, although they still won those games, too, against bad teams like Charlotte and Washington. But I'm gonna grab the points with another not very good team. We're here with Toronto, who I think is at least a little bit better than Charlotte and Washington. I mean, almost every team is better than Washington. Detroit might be better than Washington at this point, even though Washington covered for me last night. So, hey, they stepped it up for that one. Golden State, though, like I said, this is a back-to-back, very, very bad rest spot, having to go up to Canada, up to Toronto. And then who do they have next on Sunday in 2 days on national TV, Sunday afternoon, ABC? The Boston Celtics. That's a much, much bigger game. I think that this is a sandwich spot in that case, because the Knicks game is like a pretty decent win, but this is certainly at least a huge look ahead to Boston. Toronto's obviously the lowest of the 3 teams that they're getting to play here. A not very good record, a losing record, but Toronto's still a competitive enough team, kind of a mediocre team, more so I would say, maybe a slightly bad team. Toronto, they're coming off that loss where I was on them in their last 2 games. They won outright at Indiana, and then they lost to Dallas in kind of a tough game. Does that mean they're going to be in a bad spot coming off the Dallas game because they put in a tough effort there? I think the spot for Golden State's much, much worse because Toronto has a day off and they don't have any travel, and they're playing 1 fewer game since coming out of the All-Star break. So in the stretch of days since February 22nd, this is only going to be their 5th game rather than their 6th game. So they are the more rested team. They have less travel. They only play 2 of those games on the road. Golden State's playing, I believe, what is it? What did I say? A 3rd straight road game here. So that's more of a difficult spot for Golden State for sure. They're on the back-to-back. They're in the much worse rest spot. So I'll grab the Toronto Raptors here. Coming off a loss, they might be able to bounce back here. They don't have a big game up next. Their Sunday game is up against the Charlotte Hornets. I don't know if anybody really cares about that, and they won at Charlotte the last time they played them. So I think they're going to be a focused team tonight on the Golden State Warriors, whereas the Warriors might lapse a little bit in focus here, and they're laying points on the road. And to the public eye, I think it's going to look way too easy to take the Warriors, the team that's got the much better record and the stars on the team. It almost looks like it's playing them to just win the game. Looks way too easy. I don't think it is. When it looks way too easy, it's probably not. So those are the only two plays today, even though the Harvard line looks way too easy to take them as an underdog. I like the spot for Harvard, it being a bit of road reversal revenge and a letdown spot for Brown, even though you might not suffer a letdown when you're trying to battle to actually get into the Ivy tournament. But I think Harvard is obviously, they're battling to get into the Ivy too. So like I said, they're the better team there, and they're going to want to show up for that one as well and show something there and still get into the Ivy tournament and show that they are the team that that should be there out of the two. So those are the plays tonight. Harvard going old school to the Ivy in college basketball plus 2.5, I believe, and then also in the NBA plus 2.5 on the Toronto Raptors. Let's get it done, man. Have a good Friday. We'll have a big college basketball card to deal with tomorrow, so that's going to be much bigger. Peace out. Let's start the weekend right, man.